Warriors are not born. Warriors are forged in the crucible of adversity. Warriors without fear are warriors without courage. We are men, destroying stigma and stereotypes. We are a band of brothers, because in brotherhood there is strength. Our weapons are strength, empathy, and honesty. We are mental health warriors, and this is our voice.
Do you have an inspiring mission? Are you willing to make a big impact? Do you have a challenge? I don't want an easy ride. Are you fun? And do you understand the power of commitment? Because if you do, my new coaching program, Serving Powerfully, is for you. And I want to show you how effective it can be by serving you powerfully. So here's what I'm offering. I'm offering you 2 hours of my undivided attention and focus where we can work together to create a transformative experience for you. That's it. No gimmicks, no tricks. All I ask is for you to bring an open heart and an open mind and a commitment to making change. And you will see how incredible a transformation we can make in your life in 2 hours. Learn more by going to servingpowerfully.com and let's get started together. I cannot wait. And if you love the Mental Health Warriors podcast, please support the show. You can share our episodes, or you can head over to patreon.com/mentalhealthwarriors and become a patron of the show. And that simply means supporting us with $1 or $2 per episode. You can cap your contribution per month, and you can cancel at any time. So if we suck or completely go off the rails, you don't have to worry about that. Thank you so much for your continued support. It means so much to us. It helps us cover our costs, but also reach a greater audience. You know, I'm sitting here kind of laughing, actually laughing as I record this and as I edit this episode. And it's not because the content was funny so much. It's just that we do have some good laughs in here. And Omar Pinto has got this laugh that will just part the clouds, man. It's so infectious. So Brian and Omar and I had a really phenomenal conversation just about drug addiction. I mean, this guy was a baller, totally out of control. Like, think Wolf of Wall Street or some crazy Hollywood movie, like rolling in money, drugs, booze, like this crazy lifestyle until, of course, it all came crashing down. And then at that point, he completely changed his life. But man, what an unbelievable story, and what an unbelievable transformation this guy has gone through. And what he's doing now is so inspiring. And I'm going to tell you all about it. But man, loved this conversation. So glad I crossed paths with Omar. And it's just amazing to watch what he's doing. So his friends call him O. And he's the host and founder of the Share podcast. And it's a podcast dedicated to interviewing addicts and alcoholics all over the world who share their inspiring journey of recovery from alcohol, drug abuse, and other forms of addiction. I've actually had the privilege and honor to be a guest on Omar's podcast, and it was such an amazing conversation. And actually, he just posted somewhere the other day that his podcast has just crested the 1 million download mark. Like, what an accomplishment. And I'm looking at that going, holy moly, I have a long way to go, but I'm looking forward to getting there. He moved to Costa Rica in 1999 at the age of 29 to launch an online casino and sportsbook business. Unfortunately, he was also introduced to cocaine and to the wild nightlife party culture of Costa Rica. And man, in this podcast episode, he talks about that a lot. By 2003, he had lost his wife, business, and he almost lost his life. That same year, his daughter was born, and so was his newfound reason for living. And he vowed never to drink again, and that he would do whatever it takes to get clean. And on May 25th of 2003, he took his last drink and has been clean and sober ever since. And when you listen to his story, it makes it even that much more incredible that he's managed to accomplish that. He's got over a decade of experience in 12-step recovery, and throughout this time, he's been coaching and mentoring recovering addicts. He guides them through the recovery and introduces them to a new way of living. In 2013, and at 10 years clean and sober, he met and married the woman of his dreams, and with her loving support, launched the Share podcast in 2015. Share SHAIR stands for Sharing Helps Addicts in Recovery. And it was that mindset and philosophy that empowered him to get clean and change everything in his life. Every week, the Share broadcasts amazing life-changing success stories from addicts and alcoholics all over the world and shares their inspiring journey into recovery. My passion in life's purpose, not mine, well, mine too, but Omar's passion in life's purpose is to inspire people struggling with addiction to take that first step towards recovery and to show them that their life could be so much better and that there's a better way to live. Man, what a phenomenal human being and what an origin story. You are going to love this. It is like a roller coaster ride through the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And he came out relatively in one piece at the end of it and has completely dedicated his life to helping other people transform their lives. Omar, brother, I'm just so happy to call you a friend and to be able to be a witness to your journey, man, because it is fucking inspiring as hell. So guys, enjoy this episode. And I wanted to take a moment and remind you that if you know a dude struggling with mental health issues or supporting a loved one dealing with mental health issues, they do not have to be alone. Tell them about Mental Health Warriors. Just plant the seed and let it germinate. But I think the most important thing you can do for someone is let them know that there are guys out there that will support them and will welcome them with open arms. And will let them know right away that all this shit that they're carrying around that they feel ashamed of and they feel like no one understands, that's not true. And imagine what a gift it would be to them for them to find out that that there's a band of brothers waiting for them, man. I can't even tell you what it's like to watch men join this community and realize that, God, there's other people going through this and they actually give a shit about me and they have tips and strategies that will actually be able to help me and that I can lean into these guys. And you can give them that gift just by letting them know. Maybe it's not the right time for them to join. That's a choice that every individual man needs to make. But by planting the seed, you can let them know that it's an option and that they can choose it when they feel ready, and that when they do feel ready, there will be a group of amazing fucking men waiting for them with open arms. So please consider telling someone that you care about, a man dealing with mental health issues or supporting loved one dealing with mental health issues, about Mental Health Warriors. It is an incredible community and it's founded on 5 guiding principles: community, confidentiality, safety, accountability, and excellence. We lift each other up. So happy to be able to be a part of it. So enjoy this episode. Thank you, Omar. And buckle up because this is a wild fucking ride. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Mental Health Warriors podcast. We have Omar Pinto here today. Welcome, brother.
Thank you, Jason. I am very excited to be here, brother. And hey, Brian, how you doing?
Good, man. Thanks for coming on. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, it's funny. I have a funny Costa Rica story to tell you, actually. My wife and I were doing yoga this afternoon, and we were at this place that has this really awesome, outdoor gazebo type thing. And it's screened in, and you can feel the wind blowing through it. And it was just beautiful. And my wife was saying to me, she went on her honeymoon in Costa Rica, and she was saying, I get such an amazing vibe of Costa Rica in this place. And I said, it's funny you mentioned that because I happen to be talking to an awesome guy from Costa Rica tonight. So I'm sure that wasn't a coincidence.
It's not. And none of those things are coincidences. I love it.
Yeah, right. So, hey, man, I'm excited to be talking to you. So, and it's nice to be sitting on the, the roles reversed here. I've been on your podcast, and actually of all the podcast interviews I've done, that was probably one of my favorite conversations. It just really seemed to flow well for me, and we got into some really great stuff. So hopefully we can recreate the similar experience here for you and for our listeners, and let's do it, man.
We're going to make that happen.
All right, on. So I guess before we get into your story, why don't you tell us about Share and what you are trying to do with this movement that you've created?
Well, thanks. Great question. I'm glad you asked that because I'll tell you, as far as the Share podcast goes, it's something that I'm very passionate about, which is recovery. And hey, can you hear me?
Yeah,
I can hear you. Yeah.
Oh, you pushed something and then all the sound went away.
Yeah, I just put our mics on mute.
Ah, okay. Phew, I was like, oh my God, I think I lost them.
Yeah, we're good, man.
Okay, we're good. Sorry. Glad you guys had it. All right. So anyway, like I was saying, so the Share podcast is something that I was inspired to do because of my journey in recovery. When I first started listening to podcasts about 4 years ago, I listened to Entrepreneur on Fire, John Lee Dumas, and I just knew I had to do a podcast. I didn't even know what it was going to be about. And then I just decided to do it. You know, it was like one of those things where it's like I keep talking about it and I don't know if I should do it or whatever the case may be. I took the Podcaster's Paradise course and then boom, started working on doing the Share podcast. And it has just evolved into something that I could have never imagined. I have to just say that it's been a divinely guided and inspired experience because it has allowed me to build this amazing community of recovering drug addicts and alcoholics. I probably have I average about 7,000 downloads a week per episode. It's actually more downloads, but per episode, it's about 7,000, and there's about 2,500 people that are active in the private Facebook group. And it's like I get these emails and I get these private messages, and it's just like, oh, keep doing what you're doing. And even in the iTunes, I get these long reviews about how it's just impacted their lives. And then one day I just woke up and I'm like, holy shit, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is, not only is recovery my passion, but it's my purpose, and I think that for so many of us, that's what we look for. We find it sometimes in the wrong places. That's what I did initially in drugs and alcohol, and trying to fill this vacuous hole that I was trying to substitute drugs when really what I was searching for is a spiritual connection and a purpose in life. And that's exactly why I'm doing it now. And so my plan is to put together a life coaching course, like a group coaching course that's the next phase of what I'm going to do, following, just so my tribe right now who is in recovery, this will be the next facet. Like first you get your foundation of recovery, and then let's talk about what your life looks like today and what you want to do moving forward.
That is amazing, man. So listen, before we get into your backstory, did you have a hard time coming to terms with or accepting the fact that you, Omar Pinto, had this amazing power to help people change their lives? Did it take you a while to wrap your head around that? Because I know it did for me.
That's a great question. I think intrinsically, I always knew I had it because I've always had this very attractive personality, and it was easy for me. And I'm not going to say always. It did take some time to cultivate. It probably started when I started drinking, but I started to develop this personality. And then what happened was that at some point I did realize that, my personality was impactful. Like I impacted people's lives. I didn't know exactly what that was going to do for me. And when I started the podcast, all the imposter syndrome kind of kicks in. Who do you think you are? And you think you're motivational, inspirational, but are you really? And so you kind of I know what you're talking about in the sense of what you want to do. You have a feeling of what your potential is, but there's that limiting belief system that you've kind of adopted from whatever area it came from that kind of holds you back. But what's happened is because of all the positive affirmations that I've received from doing the podcast, that I at some point I was almost compelled to break through that limiting belief system of myself and just kind of step into who I am. So it for sure, it's a process. And I'm pretty sure that most people out there that are listening, to some degree know what I'm talking about. You know where you want to be, but you're just not sure you have what it takes, or that you're worthy, or that you'll be able to pull it off, or that no one will listen, or whatever the case may be for you. I think it's just a matter of, you just got to do it. All right. That's the first step.
Yeah, absolutely. So was that personality of yours that you described, I suspect that has gone from being one of your worst enemies to being one of your greatest strengths. So that personality that allowed you to connect with people, the charisma, was that something that you used against yourself in maybe your previous life?
I don't think so. When I was younger, when I was a kid, I was very shy, very introverted. And when I talk about the imposter syndrome, it was multiply that times 20. When I was in grade school and high school, I just did not fit in at all. I would have traded places with anybody. Even my name. Like, I grew up in California and I was Omar Pinto, and everybody else was, Alexander Bell, or, John Sears, or, whatever. And so for me, I had this sense of insecurity. And so this personality did not come out at all. I had to discover this. This personality came out when I was about 17 years old, when I took my first drink at my first party, and all the walls came down. Right? And all of a sudden they're like, who is this guy? I was talking, I was, communicating, I was funny, and my personality just started to come out. And so it just kind of, for me, it just translated like, okay, alcohol equals personality and popularity. So I just need to add this, always keep this in as part of the formula, and I'll be fine. So it wasn't an automatic thing. And then throughout my drinking career, that's when I started to discover who I was. My rock bottom took me, and I don't, we're probably going to get there anyway, as far as my story goes. But yeah, it wasn't, who I am today is actually more of like, the evolution through doing over 100 and over 130 different podcast interviews, where, having these conversations with people really starts to allow you to embrace who you are and connect with who you are. And then it just kind of almost naturally comes to surface.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Brian.
No, just thinking back to, it's funny talking about growing up, Omar. I'm thinking back to high school, and really how stuff that seemed so life shattering and so big there turned out, really, in the grand scheme of things, to be just a little short blip of time in your life. But, there was so much drama and so much emotion and tears and heartache, and, and I remember now looking back, right, it's 4 or 5 years of your life. Then you get to university and the same shit happens, and you think, it's the worst thing that's ever happened to you. Then you move on to life for real, and you get married, and a kid gets sick, or you lose a parent, or, real things start to happen. But to my son, who right now is in grade 11 and is going through all these things, these emotions he's feeling, this drama, this heartache, this whatever, that's very real to him. So it's just striking me how it's a cycle, yet you can't really walk somebody through it. You kind of have to let everybody live their own. Like, I could tell him, yeah, you know what, in 5 years, high school won't matter, and you don't have to pretend you're being somebody else you're not. But he won't listen to me now. He won't get that now. He needs to learn it for himself. He needs to experience it for himself,
Well, it's funny you bring that up, because I think about that too. I recently saw that miniseries 13 Reasons. Oh. And when I was watching that, I certainly, my high school wasn't like that. I didn't have that kind of that kind of an experience. That was, I think, for dramatic effect, served the purposes. But it made me immediately think about my daughter. My daughter's 14 years old, and she's just she's in 9th grade right now. And so, and we don't live together. So when I had her one weekend, I was like, hey, have you seen that series 13 Reasons? And she's like, no. And I was like, oh, and I was like, wonder if I should even recommend it. And she's like, I already read the book. And I was like, okay. I go, well, how did that impact you? How did that affect you? You know, what do you think? Does any of that stuff go on in your school? And she's like, well, I think bullying goes on in every school, not to that degree. And I really feel like, you know, with the stuff that she was going through, it wasn't that big of a deal for her to do what she did. And if she would have just communicated more, she chose not to communicate. So, you know, how is somebody going to know what's going on with her unless she chooses to communicate? And it was in that moment where I kind of, you know, subconsciously patted myself on the back. Her mother and I are divorced. We've raised her separately, but we've both ingrained our values into her. Everything that I went through in high school that we talk about, where I was insecure and I was shy and I was like, you know, uncomfortable, and some of that even came from my dad. You know, some of those feelings came from how my dad spoke to me. You know, so I have always been like with my daughter, just constantly trying to empower her and always kind of like speaking to her like a person, never speaking to her like a child or discounting how she feels. And when she said that to me, I realized, man, my kids, like, she's together, man. Like she's together. And that's a really, really, I don't know if you can cuss on this show, you know, but
please do.
Yeah. It was a really fucking good feeling, man. You know, I mean, it's very, very gratifying.
Jay, you've got daughters that are getting to be that age. Do you ever have those kind of worries that they're going to go through these identity crises and it's almost going to be out of your hands in a way?
I think it'll be out of my hands, but I guess the way I look at it, you know, it's funny because thinking back to what Omar said, and I don't know if you went through this, but the reason I started drinking was the same reason you did, which was it gave me confidence, and I wanted to just fit in, man, and I didn't give a fuck who I fit in with. I just wanted to fit in with somebody.
Right.
I came back I lived in Europe for a while when I was in grade 6, 7, and 8. You know, I went to a really small school. I came back to Canada. I went to a huge it was actually not a huge high school, but I mean, say 1,000 kids. For me, that was 10 times bigger than the school I was in, any school I had ever been in, and I didn't know anyone. And so, I just wanted someone to accept me, right? And so I kind of glommed onto the first people that accepted me, and those weren't the greatest of guys, you know. And so drinking was part of that, the way they hung out with each other. So I just went along with it because I didn't like the alternative, which was just, you know, walking around as an anonymous fuck in this sea of people that I didn't know. You know what I mean? So I felt that was the path for me now. But I think what's cool is I didn't understand at the time. You know, I didn't have any like trauma in my life or any mental health issues, but I didn't understand at all, and I'm sure we'll talk about this at length, how much I was setting myself up for problems later down the line. But for my kids, I'm really confident. Like, yes, as they get older, they're 13 and 12 now, it will continue to be more and more out of my hands, but they know in great detail my story and, you know, in an age appropriate way, but they understand why I started drinking and smoking dope and doing all that stuff. They understand that about how I just wanted to fit in, but they also understand like how that was setting me up down the road, and, you know, and what happened when their mom was sick and blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff. And also what's happened to me since I stopped drinking and the kind of human being and the kind of dad that I am. So I think for the way I go about it is I never, ever tell them not to do it. You know, because I teach them the power of their choices, and the power their choices have to shape their future. So some of those choices, they might make some mistakes and they may have consequences. They all have consequences, and they won't always make the right choice. But so instead of like, you know, giving them this direction, you will or will not do this or that, I just say, here's what happened to me. Here's the honest story about what I learned along the way and why I did what I did. Take that information and please understand that this is your life to create. Right. And that message seems to have really connected with them because they're very responsible and self-aware and self-confident young women. So I'm pretty optimistic that it's just going to continue to go that way. But who knows? I mean, I'm also not naive enough to think it's going to be completely smooth without any curveballs thrown along the way.
No, but I'll tell you this much. I think that based on that philosophy, you're going to find a lot less of what we did, because when I was growing up, children should be seen and not heard. These are my rules. If you don't like it, there's the door. It's my way or the highway. There was never any kind of it's your choice, it's your decision. It's always more of like, I know what's good for you and you need to listen to me. So instantaneous rebellion. So for me, whatever my dad was trying to instill in me, I pushed against it. And I think what the values that you're trying to instill in your daughter, very similar to what Brian's doing with his son and what I'm doing with my daughter, is just trying to empower them, not only by positively giving them affirmations, but also telling them your story. My daughter knows exactly why my wife and I are divorced. She knows exactly why I go to those meetings. She knows all about that process that led me to where I am today. But she also knows that the man that I am today is because of the choices that I made many years back to stop drinking, to stop hanging around with people that don't serve me. That's very important. Always surround yourself with people that are going to pull you up instead of drag you down. And so it's always been this sort of example, like you were saying. We lead by example. And I think when they see that, and also allowing them the opportunity to step into themselves, make their own decisions, be passionate about something and go, I think I'm going to entertain that. I think which is what's really awesome about, I'm going to plug Larry here, which is what's really great about being in the Dad's Edge group and the Dad Edge Alliance group, is that that's the general concept behind being a good father, and so I think if we, as we continue on this path, we're going to see very different things in the world.
Yeah, I just want to make a really clear point that our guest's opinion of Larry Hagner does not necessarily reflect that of the Mental Health Warriors podcast.
The views and the opinions of our guests are not necessarily.
We're actually interviewing him next week.
He is aces, man. I just interviewed him and we had an amazing conversation. I didn't know Larry prior. I just knew of the Good Dad Project, but now that I've gotten to know him as a human being, he's a solid human being.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to say one more thing, Brian. I think for me too, part of what caused the issue was, my parents grew up and they were very sheltered, right? I mean, my dad was dirt poor, grew up in a rural area, and my mom was just pretty sheltered, didn't have a lot of friends. And so in their view, to me as a teenager, I mean, like whether you're doing crystal meth or having, doing a bottle toke with pot, with hash or whatever, it was the same thing to them, right? Like it's all bad. So as a teenager, I'm like, somebody goes, you want to smoke a doob? And I'm like, yeah, sure. So I smoke it. I'm like, geez, that was pretty good, man. So then that leads me to think, geez, they were bullshitting me about that.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, fuck, I did it all, man. So, my kids don't know this. Everything you got to tell them is in an age appropriate way, but there's nothing they could possibly do that I have not done at some point in my life. So,
Amen to that, brother.
Which actually it's funny because that sort of leads me to a question I wanted to bounce off both of you. So I'm going to put my cop hat on here.
Bring it.
So how do you balance letting, whether it be your kids or other people in your life that you love or you're taking care of, how do you balance the need to let them make choices and sort of explore life for themselves with the need to sometimes protect them from what can be a really shitty place, i.e. the world? So, where do you strike that balance? Because I've seen kids go both ways. In a weekend, like a weekend out at a provincial park here on a long weekend, I've seen the best and worst in kids. I've seen kids who come up and thanks for keeping us safe. Thanks for hanging around. Thanks for being here. And I've had kids call me everything but a white man and curse at me. And I had a rolling fight with this kid across the campground. So I'm a little jaded on that position. So I'm curious to what you guys think. How do you strike that balance between letting someone live life and wanting to keep them safe from the realities of, like I said, what can sometimes be a really shitty world.
You want me to go first?
Yeah, light it up, man.
Okay, so I've been very fortunate, and I don't know, to be honest with you, I can't answer your question directly because, man, I that's a tough one. As you were describing the situation, I'm already kind of picturing myself in that scenario. And when my daughter was very young, she was between her terrible 3s and terrible 5s. It was like terrible 2, 3, and 4. It was really bad. She was very rebellious. Her mother and I had separated officially, and she now had a new stepdad. So there was a lot of pushing back from her at a very early age. She didn't want to go with me on certain weekends when I would go to pick her up. She's like, no, I want to stay with my mom and my stepdad. And I never forced it. And I remember one time my ex-wife's like, listen, it's not relevant what she wants. She needs to spend time with her dad. Take her. And I just remember feeling like the third kid, right? And I was like, yes, ma'am. So I just kind of scooped her up like a suitcase and took her with me. And I kind of started to learn that she couldn't just dictate every situation, even though I didn't want to be like my parents. I also couldn't be a doormat. And then she started to really push back. And one time she was super disrespectful with my ex. I was at the house picking her up, and she was eating something, and she's like, "This is cold." And so my ex-wife went to go heat it up, and she brings it back. And she goes, "I don't like the way this tastes. Take the tuna out of it." And I was like, I just lit up. And she went back, and she came back, and she said something else. And I said, "You're going to eat that exactly the way it is." "No, I'm not. You're going to eat that. But first, you're going to apologize to your mother for being disrespectful." "I'm not apologizing." She was like 3 or 4, man. Like I couldn't even believe I was having this conversation. Like I was fighting with a 3-year-old, right? And I was like, this is ridiculous. And I had never spanked her before in my life. And I grew up with belt marks on my ass. All right. That's how I grew up for many, many years. And so I was like, if you do not do exactly what I tell you how to do, I am going to spank you. And you've never been spanked before, so prepare yourself, right? And she just defiantly said no. And I lit her up like a Christmas tree. I mean, she was screaming. Even my ex was like, "Oh my God, I think it's enough." And I go, "It's enough when she apologizes." And then she went and she apologized, and she took her plate back and she washed it. And then I went into the kitchen and I lost it. I went over the sink and I was crying. I couldn't even believe I'd done that. And she comes back with my daughter and she's like, "Look at how sad daddy is because of what you're doing." It was the weirdest situation that happened, but it created such a dynamic effect that it only happened one other time where she became like that, and I had to spank her again. And after that, it never happened again. She would call me and she's like, "Your daughter's acting up again." And I would go put her on the phone. "What are you doing?" "Okay, you want me to come over?" No. "Okay, all right. Well, then you need to apologize and go do what your mom tells you to do." I never questioned my ex-wife's authority. I never interfered. And so it kind of, it stated something that carried on for many, many years. And now that she's older, I haven't had to deal with any of those issues. I sometimes attribute how stern I was in the beginning because I'm as soft as a fucking marshmallow now. And, I want an iPhone. Okay. It's like, it's like gone outer limits. But the thing is with her is like, she's the one who tells me, "Dad, quit cussing so much. You say so many bad words." She's the one that's like, "I hate your tattoos." She's the one that's, she dresses nice. She's polite. She's like, and so I don't have that same opportunity, but I know I can almost feel like if she was, and also we pay what I consider to be some sort of armed robbery when it comes to her private school here in Costa Rica. It's ludicrous. I could be driving a Ferrari for what I pay. I think that her surroundings and the kids that she hangs around with, it's a completely wholesome environment. So I don't see any of that. There's none of that around. So I have to believe that to a certain degree that your influence and your surroundings and all these things that you do for your children as they're growing up, and the circumstances and the environments that you introduce them to, it kind of make the difference on where that behavior is going to stem from. Because if she started acting out again and she starts, I'm not listening to what you say and I'm going out with my friends, or I don't care what you tell me, and this kind of a thing, man, I don't know. I think that side of me would come out where I would have to come back as that disciplinarian. I would have to be like, this is not acceptable. And we have to come to some sort of an agreement here, or, my absolute authority is going to have to come into play here. I am your father. But man, I got to tell you, that's easier said than done. Being as I'm Mr. Marshmallow these days, but I'm feeling for you, brother. And if it was my son, I don't even know either. My dad used to kick the shit out of me. And so I'm wondering, but he used to carry my sisters like with kid gloves. So I think maybe I kind of adopted some of that, and God, I don't know how I'd be with my son, man. I don't know if I answered that.
No, I think that was great.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think for me, so I'm gonna preface this by saying I believe that my kids. I mean, I think that I will toot my own horn. I think I'm a pretty effective parent, but I think a big part of, or not a big part, but definitely a factor in the kind of harmony, I guess I would say, we have within our family is my kids lost their mom. They had a family unit. They lost it, and then they got it back, right, with my new wife, who's their mom. And I think at some level, I don't think they think about this consciously, but I think at some level they appreciate the harmony in that family unit more than if they had never lost it. You know what I mean? So I think that's one thing. But as far as the whole making your own choices thing, they're very, very clear on the fact that every single choice they make has a consequence. So, and also that their level of freedom, or their sphere of freedom, the size of that sphere is completely dependent on the level of trust we have in our family. So they have an immense amount of control over what they are able to do, and I think they appreciate that. But they know, they have absolutely no fucking doubt, if they fuck that up, it's going to be bad. Like, they're not going to like the outcome. And they also know, I think this is the other part, they also know how that would impact us as parents, like as human beings who happen to be their parents, right? So there's been times I've had to have some tough conversations with my daughter. I'm like, I hate having this conversation with you. I have to have it because that is my responsibility as your father, but I want you to know that this sucks for me badly, and you caused that by the thing that you did. And how would you fucking feel? I'm not swear at them, but I mean, how would you feel if I did something that caused you to feel the way that you're making me feel? You know what I mean? It would be shitty. So we have a lot of those conversations, and what I do a lot too is I always talk about some of this stuff out of the context of like a tough conversation. So for example, I say something like, I'll drive my daughter to cheerleading, and I'm like, I really love, taking you to cheerleading, and I love what you're doing there, and I love being a part of it. And one of the reasons I love doing it so much is because you're an active contributor to our family, and we all have this wonderful role to play, and we all contribute, and we all trust each other, and blah, blah, blah. And that's one of the reasons that, that makes this moment that we're having right now possible. So I like to connect that kind of all those little, strands of the spider web or whatever together, so they understand the whole picture of how all this works out through all aspects of our life, not just in one specific circumstance where I'm telling them to drink or not drink or whatever. So, I mean, that's kind of how I handle it. So it's a lot of talking, and probably sometimes in fact, I know they get sick of it because they told me that today. You ask too many questions. So, but that's how I do it. And again, I'm not under no illusions that they're going to make the right choices all the time. But yeah, so it seems to be, all I can say is it seems to be working so far. So I have my fingers crossed.
I think that Cole, the level of communication that you have with your children is the key to the success here. You have this very warm, open adult relationship with them, where you're constantly explaining to them as adults, what's going on here? You're not imposing your authority or like, this is not the way things are around here. It's more of, we're a family unit. This is how you contribute. This is how I contribute. This is how we do this thing together. And I think it makes a dynamic difference. So if that's the case, I'm curious, Brian, you kind of glossed over a little bit about what was going on. Is there anything in particular or specifically speaking about like the challenges that you're facing, or was this more of a hypothetical?
No, it was more of a hypothetical. I do worry sometimes, I have to say, that because what I do for a living, that I guess I worry that my sons are going to lose out because I am going to go, no, that's not safe. Or no, I know that party you're going to, I know that house, and guess what? You're not going there. So I guess I'm just starting to grapple a little bit with letting that go. And unless it's something distinctly unsafe, I think what you and Jay have both been talking about is, letting people, you have to let your kids make their own choices. And my wife grew up in the same situation. My father-in-law was a police officer, and she says all the time, it never impacted her. It never impacted the party she went to. She never lost friends because her dad was a cop. She never, and anybody didn't like her because of that. She didn't really want to hang out with anyway. So it was more of a hypothetical, but it does have a little bit of bearing on where I'm going.
So you're a cop?
Yeah.
Yep. I didn't know that.
Yep. Yeah. So I've got a real, obviously I know a little bit more about the world than I wish I did sometimes, or about certain parts of the world. Yep. And I'm worried that, like I said, I'm going to hit a point where I go, no, you're just not doing that because I've seen too many kids, X, Y, Z, whatever.
Did you?
And so I am sort of, I'm sorry.
No, yeah, real. Did you, have you had like the similar types of conversations with your son, kind of like what Jason was just kind of narrating, like the conversation that he had with his daughter? I mean, do you have those? Is your son receptive? Do you guys have like a good communication between the two of you guys?
Yeah, actually, we're very lucky that way. I have really good. So I have one son who's going to be 16 in like a week, and my other one just turned 13. So I'm very lucky in that they're both, they don't mind having a police officer for a dad. They don't hate the fact that I'm a cop. They're not embarrassed to bring friends over. They don't get mad if I have to deal with some of their friends at a call or whatever. And I'm lucky. I have had those talks saying, listen, I know sometimes things might be harder for you than other kids because I do what I do and because I do have a real instinct to protect you guys. And I will try my best not to let the fact that I'm a police officer impair the good times that I want you guys to have. Because like Jay said earlier, we all did stupid shit. I did stuff way before I was a cop, typical teenage stuff, right? And I don't think it's fair not to let Jack and Brady experience those same things, even if I know it's a dumbass move because of what I do for a living. So, like I said, I've sort of drawn the line at, unless they're going to do something that I know is prohibitively dangerous, I stayed more or less hands off, ever going, no, you're absolutely not doing that. I have a little more radar about some things, but I'm really trying to still let them find their way in the world. And I'm very lucky that they'll tell me, hey, listen, Dad, you're coming on a little strong. You're not at work. You don't have your uniform on. And I'll just laugh and back off a little bit. So as long as they keep gently reminding me, I think I'll be fine.
Oh, dude, you're killing it, man. Like I'm picturing it. I can even picture the conversations and the general vibe and the energy at home between you guys, and just the fact that, it's not like they hate that I'm a cop and, I had to arrest one of their friends and my son didn't speak to me for a month. None of that is happening. They respect who you are because you respect who they are, and you guys are communicating, and you're drawing appropriate boundaries between you and your sons. I think what you're doing is amazing. And if I was a cop and seeing the things that you've seen and know the things that it's impossible not to be tainted. It's impossible not to go. The radar goes up. You know, you hear I'm going to this street or in this neighborhood or whatever, and boom, what? You know, I don't see how you can't.
Well, and on the flip side, I've also told them, listen, don't think that having dad as a police officer is a get out of jail free card. If you ever screw up enough that you're in a jail cell for the night, guess what? I'll come down and pick your ass up in the morning, and you can sleep on a concrete slab for the night, and maybe you'll think twice before you do whatever it is you did next time.
That's awesome.
So, you know, a little tough love.
That is awesome. Sure. I love it.
What I love about this podcast is we can just talk about whatever's interesting, man. It's awesome. So let me ask you a question. So you take your first drink at 17 and bam, it's like, you know, shot of confidence, stiffens the spine. I'm 10 feet tall. How I want to take it back. So you mentioned that your dad was pretty physical with you when it came to discipline and that kind of stuff. Did that impact your self-confidence as a young man in any way where drinking, you know, kind of was an antidote to what you had been through?
Well, the thing is, as a kid, you don't even realize it. I didn't realize how much it had impacted me. And, you know, and my dad never was like physically abusive. He was just verbally abusive.
Oh, okay.
And so, yeah, I can never, it never, you know, when I thought about abuse, I was always thought about physical. For me, it was never about verbal. And, you know, you don't learn about these things until later. At least I didn't. And so growing up in that household where, you know, I always struggled with my grades. I always struggled. They used to pick on me at school. And so meanwhile, my sister that's 1 year younger than me was a straight A student, super popular, very confident. It was like we lived in this dichotomy, this weird sort of, you know, house of different people with different personalities. And so, yeah, I didn't know it, but absolutely, you know, my low self-esteem, my lack of self-worth, my inability to even make my own choices, because I didn't have the opportunity to make my own choices. I had to do what, you know, the rules were in the house. You do this, you do that. You can't do this, you can't do that. So I didn't realize it, you know, when I drank for that first time, it was like everything just got erased. Like I just completely forgot, or I don't even know if that's the right word, but it just numbed it all out. That's the better word. It numbed out all the things that I had learned, good, bad, and different, and all of a sudden I was just somebody new, and that just took me, you know, off to the races.
And I suspect being the age you were and being how especially young men interact with one another, that new person that you were was probably much more social, much more likable, much more popular, and you got this positive reinforcement without realizing what you were setting yourself up for.
Absolutely. I tell you, my best year in high school was my senior year, because that's when I discovered drinking, made my friends, and then all of a sudden I had pockets of friends that I could hang out with. Then college was the absolute best years of my life. Best years of my life. Drank all the way through them. Didn't graduate, didn't finish, but I had the best time ever. And, you know, just continued until I moved to LA. And when I was 25 years old, my first big consequence came when I got arrested for a DUI. And, you know, like Brian, my dad told me a long time ago, listen, if you ever end up in jail, do yourself a favor. Do not use that one phone call to call me. Call somebody else, because you're staying there. You know, and I remember that. I mean, that message lasted a long time. And when I got arrested and then ended up in jail, woken up in a drunk tank, I was terrified. I go, this ain't happening again. And so while I was in California, or while I was in LA, I respected drinking and driving. I respected those boundaries. So I would never drink and drive again until I moved to Costa Rica. And then all bets were off.
Why did you end up moving to Costa Rica?
Well, I was in LA. I was a mortgage broker back in 1990, 98, 99. And I met somebody that was putting together an online casino and sportsbook in Costa Rica. And we had just kind of crossed paths a little bit, kind of a little bit of a chemistry. and they needed somebody that was responsible and could go over there and just set up the operation. So I was going to be the operations manager and set things up and meet with all the contacts, the software providers, and the people that were gonna the people that are gonna provide the human resources for me and the marketing and all this kind of stuff. So I had this at the time. By the time I got to close to 30, I had this personality that a lot closer to this one, especially when I would be out drinking, right? So I did. So people would meet me, and I was a very likable guy, and so I attracted people. And then this is just one of those situations where the guy, you'd be a perfect fit, man. I think you'd be a perfect fit. You're not married, nothing's holding you back over here. Give it a shot. Why not? What do you got to lose? 3 months, all expenses paid. If you stick around, you'll get a percentage of the business. And I went, and I was off to Costa Rica. And, man, I got to tell you, man, I had no idea what I was in store for. Costa Rica is just a party mecca. It is just downtown San Jose is an ass clown festival. And there's so many expats down here that move down, and that's what they do. It's got one of the highest alcoholism rates in Central America. Everyone down here is pura vida. That means pure life. And so there's this culture of drinking, culture of partying. And I was a guy that had spent so much of my life rigid and stiff and always trying to fit in and trying to be the businessman. And I never finished college. I didn't have a degree. When I got into the mortgage business, it was all self-taught, and it was just this grind to get to where I was. And so I was just kind of like this. I was this 30-year-old old man, because I had these stiff sort of rigid rules for myself. And even when I partied, when I'd go out and do all my crazy blackout drinking, it was weekend warrior stuff. But Monday, I was in the office. I was working. I was never sick. I was never, it was always about like, I'll make money first. I'll be happy second. And that was my mentality. That was my drive. And I came down here and I got introduced to cocaine for the first time, and all bets were off. That person just almost like disintegrated into the ground. And I could have cared about anything else. And when I discovered cocaine was, when I talk about what happened when I drank, cocaine, multiply that times 20. I came alive. I was like, whoa, this is like, where have you been all my life? I would have finished with a economics degree, at California Polytechnical if I would have just been on cocaine. Like, this stuff is like amazing. I'm brilliant. I'm powerful. It's just craziness. So yeah, it was just like this morphed personality just came out. And so, it quickly went from me having this amazing, dynamic, attractive personality to that guy that whenever you saw him, you stayed as far away from me as possible. My nickname, and it's funny because these guys were partying like rock stars, and my nickname would soon become Omar. I'd walk into a place and they'd go, "Oh, Omar," and they knew I was going to come in and just terrorize the place, and I already forgot what the question was.
Doesn't matter. Fuck, it doesn't matter, man.
Yeah, you're rolling with the story.
All right.
Just keep.
So what do you mean by terrorize?
Well, what happened is that once I got introduced to the cocaine, the reason why is because the guys were going to go out to a casino. It was like midnight, and we'd been drinking all night, and I was passing out. I was falling asleep on the desk. This is my first week there. And I couldn't. They're like, "Hey, we're gonna go to the casino." I'm like, "Okay, guys, I'll catch you guys tomorrow. I'm going to bed." And they're like, "No, dude, you're coming with us. Come on, oh." And I was like, "No, man, I'm going to bed. I'm going to bed. Forget it." And I'm like, I can't. I'm like, I'm literally falling asleep. They're like, "Not a problem. Let's hook you up." And so next thing you know, I've got a plate of cocaine in front of me, and this is one of those defining moments, gentlemen. It's one of those defining moments. I'll never forget it, and it changed my life forever. Here I am, 28, 29 years old, thinking that because I've never done this before, there's no possible way I could be addicted to it. This is how little information I had about addiction. And I needed, just like I did, 10 years ago when I was in high school, I needed to feel accepted. I needed to feel a part of. I needed these guys to embrace me as one of their own, so that I could fit into this group and I could get my casino started. And I did that first rail of cocaine, and that was it, man. It owned me. It owned my ass. And from that moment on, I went from a guy who only partied on the weekends to a guy who was smoking weed every day, drinking alcohol every day. And now whenever somebody was holding cocaine, I was doing cocaine. And so there was that huge shift. And so for that first year, I actually built a business because it gave me, anybody who's done cocaine, you know that it works for a minute. So that first year, I built an entire business, snorting cocaine and just, living this vida loca lifestyle. And in the meantime, I'd met my wife. Like the same time I got off that plane and met cocaine, I also met the woman I was going to marry. So two relationships started to develop, right? And so, I managed to preserve me for a while, long enough for her to fall in love with me. But, about 2 years into our relationship, man, I between, year one and year two, things just started unraveling like crazy. And she's like, what is wrong with you? And then when she found out that I was doing cocaine, it was like, she was gone. She left me I don't know how many times. I used to beg her to come back to me. And what would happen is it just keeps getting worse. It just keeps getting worse. And I go from what I didn't realize is that from that first hit of cocaine, I was going to spend the next 4 years of my life chasing that high that I got in that moment. I was going to be chasing that specific feeling that I was never going to get again. I was never going to get that feeling again because I didn't know anything about dopamine. I didn't know anything about receptors. I didn't know anything about addiction. I didn't know anything about the stuff that I know today and know what I was up against. And I was going uphill without a paddle, and I had no idea what I was doing. So that was the whole. And so towards the end there, for those of you that have done cocaine, you start having these drug-induced psychotic, paranoid delusions. And you start to think that people are after you and people are talking behind your back, and that my best friend's sleeping with my wife, and that my future father-in-law is actually a drug kingpin, and that, these people over here are coming to get me. I don't know who they are, but they're coming to get me, right? And it's just this whole horrific sort of monster that I become. I was carrying a gun with me at all times. And so I was considered a very dangerous individual, and for the most part, nobody would fuck with me. And the business, unfortunately, did well. So the better the business did, the more drugs I did, the more my ego grew, and the more I just pushed people away from me. And so thank you God, everything came like it always does. Every good rock star cocaine rock bottom story. My business tanked. We lost our credit card processing because when the U.S. figured out that the best way to debilitate online casinos is just to cut their Visa and MasterCard processing, that was the first blow. And then Google did their algorithm change, and I had done all this SEO work based on link farming, which is a no-no. And everything that we had built, 150 websites that were ranking number one in Google and driving hundreds of players every week to our site, boom, disappeared overnight. So then I was now no longer this, powerful casino czar asshole. I was now just an asshole. And so quickly, my partners took that as an opportunity. They changed the locks on the door. They called security. This guy doesn't get in the building. They did an intervention, and boom, they had me in rehab, and that's when it kind of started to shift, right? But man, they had to sneak the guns away from me and all that kind of stuff. It was a very tricky, sneaky situation because, until I started to get some clarity and some sobriety, I would have probably shot you if you got in my way.
Holy shit, man!
So Omar, so at the height of your, for lack of a better term, power. Okay. So at the height of when things are rocking, the business is humming along, were you living, and I know it's very glamorized, of course, but were you living this sort of they sort of always do sort of a montage in drug movies where the person is manic all day and they crank whatever their business out all day. Nighttime is parties and cars and fine dining and booze and, I mean, a lot of times women. Is that far from the truth, or were you sort of kind of living this rock star lifestyle?
Buddy, it was absolute rock star living. I actually thought I was a fucking rock star. It was everything you just described. I usually don't go into details. I'm usually afraid that someday my daughter.
No, absolutely.
Someday my daughter's going to hear this.
No, absolutely.
But it is all of that. If you've seen the movie Scarface and Casino and Heat and all these movies where it's just all these gangsters and what gangsters do, that was exactly, not only was it the life that I led, but it was the life that I'd always wanted to lead. I mean, my heroes in life, the people that I emulated and gravitated towards were Al Pacino and Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci, Goodfellas. I mean, you watch that kind of stuff, and when you're under the influence, it's very easy to just kind of adopt the mentality. I mean, we owned a bar. Not only did we have a casino, but we had a physical bar. So there we would go. We had a VIP room. Just imagine the movie. I have an entire movie that I lived. We had this, it was, I can't even remember the name of the bar, but we had a bar, had a VIP room, exclusive. And I was in there every night and just ordering tons of booze and women and drugs and the whole just absolute, just Hollywood cocaine rock star story. And as you watch it, and like the way you're describing it, most of us watch these movies, you're like, look at that guy. Damn, look at that party. Like, that's wild. That's unbelievable. And then at the end, it's always the same. Oof, sheesh, that hurts. Yeah. Scarface got shot about 60 times. You know what I mean? That was the end of the movie. Blow, George Young ends up in jail and insane for the rest of his life. Never sees his daughter again. So it's absolutely everything that you picture, and just going into great detail in it is just, it's like, what it is. And it's, yes, you're right. It happened.
So, and of course the crew you're running with, they're all the same mentality, right? Everybody's just living hard 24/7.
Oh, dude, I walked into like I said, clown shoes. It was a circus. They used to say, the circus is in town, and 20 of us would go into a restaurant, and before the night was over, every single person other than us was gone from the restaurant. The loud Americans, drunk off their asses, everybody taking turns going back and forth to the bathroom, you know what I mean, getting loaded, partying, and just throwing money around, like, just the typical obnoxious, United States citizen. I'm not even gonna say American because I live in the Americas, and it was disgusting. The people that I hung around with, I'm gratefully today, I'm 14 years clean and sober, and none of those people I have probably, if I've run into them, you know what I mean, like at the grocery store or something. I'm like, hey, dude, what's up? And then, but I haven't spent time with anybody like old crew since I got clean and sober. I knew that was over, and that included all my homies.
Sorry, go ahead, Jay.
No, I was just going to say, I was of that same mindset. I just never, ever found myself in that kind of situation that you did. But when I was in my 20s, I can remember going to Cancun, I think it was, or somewhere in Mexico with my buddy in my 20s. And he's like, yeah, we're going to go down there, man. We're going to do some blow. It's going to be great. And I'm like, I'm not fucking doing that. Are you fucked? Like, I'm like, I'm going to end up in a Mexican prison. There's no way I'm doing it. I check into the hotel. As I'm checking in the hotel, the guy working behind the desk goes, you want some blow? And I'm like, fucking right. Let's do it. And I didn't sleep the whole fucking weekend. So, but I just was fortunate enough that it was too expensive, and I never found myself in a situation where I had easy access to it.
Oh, be grateful for that, man.
Yeah, no shit. Sorry, Brian, what were you going to say?
Well, I was just, and I can only equate this to my own my own. Okay, so I don't know how much, if you know any of my backstory at all, Omar, but I was diagnosed with PTSD from a job related thing in 2012. And the time leading up to that, I mean, I was spiraling quick. There was booze, and there was suicide thoughts, and there was, let's just say, leaning on the wrong people for support. I'll leave it at that. And I remember a couple of times of clarity, literally looking in the mirror going, fuck, what are you doing? Like, what is wrong with you? And then something would happen and I'd get triggered by something, I'd be off, and that moment of clarity would be gone. Did you ever have any of those moments when this was really rolling, where you kind of maybe literally woke up one morning and went, fuck, well, this is crazy. What am I doing? Or was it kind of just go, go, go until the inevitable crash?
Oh, no, buddy. It's funny that you would say that, because, you know, all of us that are recovering addicts, we all have that same story, that there are all these opportunities. Because, you know, for me today, you know, God is every aspect of my life. You know, my spirituality, you know, I may drop the F-bomb 37 times in this interview, but I have a very strong spiritual connection with my higher power, which I choose to call God. And I know that there was hundreds of those moments of clarity where I remember looking at myself in the mirror, buddy. And towards the end, it was very difficult to do that. It was very difficult to look at myself in the mirror. I'd blow my nose and chunks of flesh would just pour out of my nose. I would take cold showers for an hour and get out and still be sweating and so hot and not be able to sleep, and just living in this absolute torment, and look at myself and then grab the shit and dump it down the toilet and flush it and say, I'm never going to do it again. And 20 minutes later, calling the dealer. Okay. That is what I know. There was all those hundreds of moments of clarity that I had. And I didn't know what to do. It's just, I said that I'm never going to do this again. I hate this. I hate myself. I can't believe I'm doing this. And within an hour, I'm back to chasing it. You know, it's a horrific thing. And you know, I had that when I got sober. When I got clean, I had prayed for death the night before. I had done so much blow. I had drank so much booze, and I couldn't get my heart to stop racing, and I was just super anxious. So I'm guzzling this bottle of whiskey, and I'm popping pills, and I'm smoking weed, and I'm like this chemist trying to get it to come down. It would not come down. And I just remember taking so much shit that at some point I realized, I go, my God, I think I've taken too much shit. And then there was this carving of the Last Supper behind my bar, and I just got on my knees. And I said, God, and this is the first time I had prayed sincerely, not, I swear to God, you know, if you help me out here, I'm never going to do it again. It wasn't one of those. It was.
Also, it wasn't a desperation prayer.
It wasn't a foxhole prayer, because I'd done thousands of those, thousands of foxhole prayers. I swear to God, never going to do it again. And this time it was different. It was like, I don't know who you are. I don't know where you are. I don't know what you are. But I'm praying I'm on my knees right now, and either take me out of this world or help me find a way to get clean, because I can't do this. I cannot do this any longer. My wife was pregnant at the time. It was absolute turmoil and chaos everywhere around me, and I was not getting better. I was only getting worse. And so I prayed for death, and I finally passed out. You know, I should be dead. I woke up the next morning, and I just remember my first thought was, wow, I'm not dead. And then my next thought was, man, you know that therapist you went to go see 10 months ago, he told you that he couldn't help you because you were a drug addict, and then maybe you should go to one of those NA meetings. And there was that 101 or maybe 501 gleaming, the moments of clarity, that brief moment of clarity, that this time I got up, I got dressed, I put on my clothes, and I drove to that therapist's office without thinking about it. I didn't call him to see if he was there. I didn't have breakfast. I didn't take a shower. I just got dressed, got in my car, drove there, and I'm in tears. And I said, I need help. Can you help me get to one of those meetings that you told me about 10 months ago? And he looked at me with this just this face of just absolute love and concern. And he said, absolutely, come into my office. Let me give you the directions. The meeting starts in an hour. Go there now. And I've been going to meetings. That was October 5th, 2002. I started going to meetings and, did 5. I managed to stay clean and sober for 5 months, relapsed for 2. And then after that, May 26, 2003, I clean and sober since then.
Wow. So when you had that moment of surrender, did you have an idea that somehow this time was going to be different, or were you just so desperate? I mean, you couldn't even see beyond the next 5 minutes.
There it is. Yeah. I couldn't see anything beyond what was in front of me at that moment. It was a moment by moment thing. It was surreal. There was no thinking. If I would have thought my way out of it somehow. To me now in retrospect, it was completely divinely guided, because I didn't think, I just did. And there was, here's what I equate it to though, guys, that prayer, that's something that was new. I'd had all these moments, all these times before, but for whatever reason, this time I saw it for what it was. It was a moment to take action. It was not a thought that I'm going to do this later, or I should do this, or I probably should do this. It was an impulse that I can only attribute to God having mercy on me, and God's grace just completely embraced me in that moment, picked me up, got me dressed, got me in the car, and got me over to that guy without even the opportunity to think about it. I personally, I have to believe that that's what went down.
I don't know how you stopped, Brian. I mean, for me, obviously wasn't in. Well, we all, we all do this, right? Comparing situations is ridiculous. But in my particular case, I just had this. My 9-year-old daughter, told me she was disappointed in me. That was the last rationalization I was clinging to, was that I was a great dad. So I had. That was the thing. And I realized, she comes up, she, fucking totally shit-faced. She tells me she's disappointed in me. And a 9-year-old to have the courage to do that was amazing. But that was my lowest moment. And then I go downstairs, I pass out, I wake up. And after trying to fucking quit drinking 50 million times over the last decade, I just woke up and I'm like, I'm done. I am fucking I have no idea why I think I'm done. Why would this time be any different? But I just had this sense of peace. And I don't know where it came from. And I've thought about it a million times about why it was that what was it about that particular moment? And I've not one time, it'll be 3 years in a few weeks actually. But
awesome.
Not one single time, for not 1 second have I ever wanted to have a drink again. I have no idea why. I mean, I know now though, and I'm curious to talk to you about this, but for me, I understand so much about why I was drinking now, if I look back on it now, because I understand that my wife's death, her sickness and her death was so fucking traumatic for me, but I did not have the emotional development or self-awareness to understand how traumatic that was for me. So I'm a guy, we just get shit done. We pick up, we move on. We, had a new family to build. I still had kids to raise. I'm done. Basically the moment I walked out of the cemetery, I was like, okay, I'm done. Fucking done thinking about that shit, not done thinking about it, but I'm done now. I'm closing that chapter of my life. It's time to move on. Right. But I kept drinking. And so I understand now that I was drinking to deal with the hurt and the trauma and just the emotional devastation of that whole situation. And I think, talking about mental health warriors, that's what we see that all the time, right? I'm sure you've seen this a million times. When people suffer trauma, oftentimes it's childhood trauma. oftentimes, whatever, it doesn't really matter. It's when people go through things in their life, when they have these horrible adverse experiences, man, you got to heal from that shit. And people, I think, so often don't understand the connection between what happened to them in the past and what's happening to them right now. I mean, I'm assuming you must see that all the time.
Well, absolutely. All the time. It's called self-medication because you don't know, just like you were saying, you didn't know the dynamics of what was going on in your body, in your mind, in your brain. Your body is being bombarded with all these feelings and emotions, and you need to numb that out. You know, all this stuff, all this chaos is going on in your life. Same with the people that I interview. Some of them were molested for years as children from their parents. All right. And so, you know, that constant bombardment of those memories had them doing some of the most horrific drugs to just completely just black all that out. And it was just a constant roller coaster ride. And so they self-medicate to try and alleviate themselves from that pain. And not everybody is an addict. And that's, and you know, obviously case in point, Jay, you know, you were doing exactly the same thing they were doing, self-medicating, but you don't have that addictive gene or tendency or whatever it is. I don't know, you know, how else to explain it, but you know, there are those of us that, you know, once we've crossed that line, you know, any mood or mind altering substance just sends us into a tailspin, into an absolute tailspin. So the fact that, you know, you were able to, and I have to believe that for you, the way you described it, man, having your 9-year-old daughter looking up at you and tell you you're a disappointment, I mean, that's, for me, that's worse than God talking to me. You know, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, and you have to feel like the biggest piece of shit on the planet. Like there's gum on the floor stuck to my shoe that's got more value than I do in this moment. And you can use that to fuel yourself and say, that's it. I'm done. I mean, when my daughter was born, I mean, I you know, I'll that's part of my story too. Part of my story is when my daughter was born, I was in the middle of a relapse and she was 1 month old. And my ex-wife came looking for me because I disappeared. And she rang the doorbell. I looked outside the window. I didn't even open the door. I just peeked outside the window like some crack fiend. And I'm peeking outside the window and I see her, my ex-wife, holding my daughter in her onesie. She's a 1 month old. And all I felt was disdain for myself, utter self-loathing and disgust. And I said, this is it. I'm going to do whatever it takes. And for some of us, it's different avenues. You know, you made a decision in that moment that you were done. I did too. I just needed help. I needed to go to 12-step recovery because I knew if I didn't do that, if I didn't surround myself with other guys that were like me, I couldn't be alone with my thoughts. I could not be alone with my thoughts. I thought forever. You know, later on, that certainly turned out to not be the case. Thank you, God. But in the interim, you know, I couldn't trust myself.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
I don't know if I got anything left, man. Like after hearing that, like that,
it's rough,
like,
man.
It's just such, like, your story is just so steeped in redemption, and then not only redemption, but, and I hate to use the phrase, you know, paying it forward or whatever, because it sounds trite, but you took these lessons you learned, you took the second chance you had, you took this redemption, and you just fucking ran with it. You just went nuts with it. And I mean, and the community you founded around it is just stunning. So I think it's like, you know, it's, and again, feel good story and all these other things are so trite, but it's just this awesome story of redemption and, you know, kind of a return from, you know, this black place where you found yourself. So I just, man, it's just to hear, you know, it's one, and it's like Jay and I both knew your story, right? Like, you know, we'd read, you know, the website and whatever, but to hear it and to hear the detail and to hear, you know, sort of that, you know, epiphany moment when you literally got down on your knees and asked, you know, hey, this is it. Like, you know, send me one way or the other. It's just awesome. Like, it's just so much to take out of it, Omar. Like, thank you so much for sharing. It's in that depth.
It's an honor and a privilege, brother. I mean, this is what I do. This is why I do it. I mean, Jason's doing the same thing. I see Jason out there, with his videos about, I will not judge you. And there is nothing more important to anyone who is out there suffering. I mean, Jason's story is brutal. For those of you who haven't heard Jason's story on the Share podcast, it's brutal. And it tells the tale. It explains to you why this man is the way that he is and why he's doing what he's doing. And so, the Book of Open and being vulnerable, these are not things that we grew up with. These are not the topics of discussion I had with my father. Be open, express yourself, tell me your feelings. I will not judge you. Bullshit. I didn't grow up with any of that. And, there's those of us that are still trying to break free from those chains of dysfunction that we inherited, these limited beliefs that we've adopted. And, we have had, I don't regret anything, not 1 minute of what I went through, because I had to fight that much harder to become the man that I am today. And going through all that adversity allows me to sit in a place of no judgment, of absolute love, unconditional love, of compassion. And so this is what naturally comes out of me. When I am on an interview with someone, and Jason said, we had good interaction, most of the guys I interview just go, man, that was a great interview. That's one of my favorites. There's a flow, because guess what? I gave you the space to open up and share your truth and be vulnerable. And there's not too many opportunities where people have to just get butt naked honest about where they're at and what's happened to them. And this is why I am the warrior that I am today. I'm a fucking Viking. There's nothing that I can't get through. All right, based on my life experience. So I would never take that away. You think about that movie 300 and what they did to the sons, right? They would send them out into the wilderness till they were like, 21 or something like that. And they just come back indestructible. And that's how I feel. I feel like I was cast out for, 4 years into the pit of despair, and I didn't die. I came back a warrior, and now I share my message and I help others, find their purpose in life. That's my job. That's what I do.
That's amazing, man. So, hey, listen, I know we're kind of going a little long. Do you have time for a couple more questions? There's a couple of things I really want to know.
Shoot.
Okay. So how long after you're in recovery, how long does it take for you to realize that your life is changing for the better? Aside from the acute, like you're not in the shower and thinking you're going to die and all that horribly acute stuff. But I mean, wow, I am starting to look at the world in a different way. I am interacting with people a different way. I don't need this shit. Life is getting better. How long did that take?
Okay, well, there's two answers to that. And the first answer is instantaneously. Okay, I walked into my first meeting, like I told you, in October 2003, October 5th. And when I sat down and I listened to these guys share their story, I knew that I had found my brotherhood. I had found my tribe. And I stopped using everything that day. So that was another one of God's graces. So that same day that I prayed, the night before I prayed for death, went to the therapist, went to my first meeting, and for the next 5 months, I didn't pick up a drink or a drug for 5 months. That's God's grace. And I started to really have hope for the first time. But here's what happens. Because it takes a while to unscramble the scrambled eggs that have become your brain after so many years of drug abuse, that after that little pink cloud of, wow, this is awesome. I think I can do this. My life's going to get better. These guys are doing great. I can be like these guys. Then the first challenge comes. The first hurdle presents itself. And I've got no coping skills. And I don't know what to do. And I don't know how to deal with these emotions that I haven't felt in so long because I've been numbing them out. And that's when I relapsed. And then coming back from that was actually pretty tough. So that was my experience. That, you know, if somebody's listening out there, there's no short answer, and it all depends on what your experience is going to be when you come in. But at first, like I said, it was like a euphoric feeling of hope that I found my tribe and that I could do this. Then some problems came. I relapsed, got caught up in it again. It got really, really bad, but I always knew, when I want to stop the merry-go-round this time, I know I got to just go to one of those meetings. That I always knew. So it kind of fucked up my high too. It always did, because I kept thinking about the meetings the whole time that I was getting high. And then so finally, when I made that final decision, the next 6 months after I quit for the last time in May, those 6 months were really, 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 really tough. But I would say that, you know, once you've kind of gotten about a year under your belt and you've, you know, just adopted some new values in your life, and you've done some things, some foundation building practices, and you've kind of instilled them into your life, you need to do something. You need to build some sort of foundation to keep you moving throughout that first year. The momentum just starts to build. You just start to build. And ultimately, just like you'll hear a lot of people talk, you know, the most successful people out there, it's like, you know, life, the most important thing you can do is be of service, help others and be of service. You know, the best way to get out of your own head, to get out of your own misery, to get out of your own sadness, is to reach out and help somebody else out. And so when you start to do that as well, which is part of what we do in our fellowship, it changes the dynamic of your mindset. Sorry, that was a little long-winded.
Well, that's actually a perfect segue into my last question, because what I think is, I've really realized, and I totally connect with when you say like you wouldn't change a thing, right? Because every step in your life, every moment led to the man you are today. And I always tell people, you know, when they are maybe in the depths of despair or feeling like shit or feeling like they're worthless, I always tell them to consider that the source, what they think is their greatest source of shame or weakness or guilt, are they willing to consider that if you use that story in the service of others, that it could actually be the source of your greatest positive contribution to this world, or even to another human being? And so I guess what I wanted to ask you is, how long did it really take you to get the idea that, holy shit, man, this story and what I've been through and where I've come from, this is the path forward for me and how I want to be of service to other people? Like, how long did it take you to get to that point?
Well, throughout my first year after that relapse, right? Because it was very, very challenging. But I'll tell you what, I went to my first convention, my first Narcotics Anonymous convention, 2 weeks sober after my relapse. So I did have some foundational work done about 5 months in, but I was just 2 weeks in after this one. And I went to this convention, and there was this speaker up there. His name was Usman D, and he was a closing speaker. I'll never forget it. And he gave this closing speech, and I said, that's going to be me one day. There was me, 2 weeks sober, right? Or clean, just hanging on by a thread. And here I am looking at this guy and going, that is going to be me one day on that stage telling my story. And, you know, last year, as a matter of fact, I was flown out to Seattle to speak at the the Seattle convention of Narcotics Anonymous out there. I was the opening speaker for the convention. And so it was in that moment that I knew it. Of course, there was a lot of challenges, and within the first year, it was really, really tough, and it was biting my nails kind of stuff. And I just kept going to meetings and working the steps. But I always remembered that keynote speaker, and right around my 1 year, my sponsor said, it's time for you to start sponsoring guys. And as soon as I started sponsoring guys, and I started to feel what it was that my sponsor would feel on the other side of the table, I said, this is it. For the rest of my life, this is what I do. So I knew pretty early on the power of this message that I had inside of me. And then of course I remember, I think I was either my first year or it might've been my second year. Somebody, they invited me to share my story and I told my story, and you know, it was just one of those things where I just come to life, right? I just come to life, and people come up to me after the meeting and go, that was such an amazing story, and I haven't been able to put together 30 days, and I haven't been able to develop a relationship with a higher power, but the way you explain it, and the way you talk about your higher power, and the way you talk about your story, and the way you talk about your daughter has inspired me. And so it just was this cannonball. It's just this snowball effect that just kind of happened. And it just keeps happening, bro. I mean, it hasn't stopped. Like the podcast launched, I started to get a little bit like people listening here and there. And now I can't keep up with the messages and the posts and the emails. And it's just, you know, all the love that comes in is overwhelming. Like I can't keep up with it. So it's right. You know, it's been a while, but it just keeps, I just keep getting more affirmations that, buddy, you're not just where you need to be. Get ready. Okay? Turbo Boost's about to start.
I love it. Bam. Man, that's a perfect place to end it. So listen, brother, this has been, man, what a wild ride actually, but this has been just a phenomenal conversation. We got some parenting talk in there. We got some, clown shoe conversation in there, and then we wrapped it up with a nice bow with some redemption, right? So it's a perfect story, and thank you so much for sharing it. So if people want to get a hold of you and find out more about what they're doing, and I cannot, if there's anyone seriously dealing with a substance abuse problem, God, you've got to reach out to Omar, join the community, and it's just, it could be a life changer for you for sure. So what's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
Well, first of all, you can go to the website. It's www.thesharepodcast.com. Share is spelled SHAIR, which stands for Sharing Helps Addicts in Recovery. You can also join the private Facebook group. So for those of you that want to maintain your anonymity, it's a private group. Just type in Share Private Group. It'll pop right up. You can join right in. My email's on the website, @thesharepodcast.com. You can reach out to me. I'm on every single one of the social networks, basically. So I'm not tough to find. I'm the bald guy with the glasses and the goatee. And I will just follow up with what Jason always says, which is, I will not judge you. So come one, come all.
Bam, and I just wanted to say one last word: bald glasses and a handsome motherfucker.
Right back at you.
All right, thanks, brother.
Thank you, man. This is awesome.
Thanks, Omar. Take care, brother.
All right.
Thanks for your time, man. We appreciate it immensely.
Thank you, Brian. Much love, brother.
Well, I'm sure you see that I didn't actually overhype that interview. That was a fantastic conversation. And thanks to Brian for bringing your perspective too, buddy. You always have a ton of value to add. So thanks, guys. I really, really enjoyed that, and I'm sure you did too. And I hope if you took anything out of that, it's that, man, hope is possible, right? No matter how dark things get, there is hope for you. And there are hands extended to you, and it's up to you to choose to take them. So thanks, guys. I really, really enjoyed that, and I hope you as the audience got a ton of value out of it. And I will end this podcast this exact same way I end every single podcast, and that's by saying, if you are struggling, I want you to know that I have struggled too. And if you ever want to talk to me, I want you to know that I will not judge you. And please give someone else the gift of your attention, your non-judgment, and your compassion. Until next time.